have an interesting story today, something that we don't usually do, and we want to talk about something that's really close to our hearts and close to the industry's heart, and that is weight.
The reason we're doing this is because of what you've said on YouTube. This was supposed to be a YouTube-only segment.
Yep.
And then we got so much feedback from you on the YouTube segment we did that we thought this needs to be a bigger segment and a bigger discussion.
Absolutely, because over the years, I don't care when you go back to, the two things in the industry that have always been top of mind, most important, and most sought after is weight and horsepower. And truthfully, I think at the end of the day, if you have a lightweight sled, it can make up for quite a lack of horsepower. We've proved that over the years. When you come down to it, weight really is a big issue. And today we have the numbers because I did weigh-ins over last year and this year, and we're going to continue to do that moving forwards. But I really want to talk about some of the interesting things between manufacturers' suggested dry weights and the actual, our real-world sled weights that we found out.
And the differences between competing sleds from manufacturer to manufacturer.
At the end of the day, we're going to go through some really odd comparisons of lightweight sleds. We're going to go through some year-to-year ones and show you that there really hasn't been that much of a change. And then there's some sleds that we're going to compare that are similar with some shocking outcomes that I don't think either of us expected. Nope. So right now, I think we should start out with what everybody's been waiting for, and that is the turbo sleds.
Why don't you say what the weights are? Basically, we're talking about the Skidoo two-stroke 850 turbo competition. So why don't you go through the weights and then we'll talk a little bit about what I learned, and it'll make a lot more sense.
Yeah, so for this year, 2024, the MXZ competition package, 850 turbo, has the Ripsaw 2, which is a 2-ply track, 137. It comes with the competition shocks on it and the 10.25 display, as well as shot. That weighs in at 614 pounds. And when we talk about any weights here, we're talking about ready to ride. So that's full of oil, full of fuel, full of coolant, and any other fluid that needs to be put in there.
I do have to say that. Any other fluid that can be filled is full.
When we go to, so that's 614 pounds. When we go to the Indy VR1 Boost, it's the 850, 1.35 Cobra R-rated, so that's obviously a 2-ply as well. 137, it's got the Walker Evans velocities, has the 7S display in it, and it weighs in at 602 pounds. Now it has electric start, so there's a battery in there as well, but keep that in mind. We went from shot to electric start, and shot gives you a serious advantage in weight.
So for sure.
The Skidoo competition package is 14 pounds heavier. We were wondering about that. We knew the methanol tank would weigh extra. We didn't know how much, but there's extra information, and I think you need to bring people up to speed.
And the thing that got us is because when you look at the 850 naturally aspirated and compare those two, the Skidoo is lighter.
It's lighter.
So how come when you go to a turbo, do you get a complete switch? And the reason is, I guess it's straightforward, but then as I'm sitting here thinking about it, it gets less straightforward. It's very complicated. The reason is that the competition package, which is the only way you can get a Skidoo turbo, is a heavy snowmobile because it is the competition package. It has extra bracing, it has a 2-ply track, it has a bigger brake, it has much larger shocks.
One thing we didn't realize is those shocks, they told you, they said they are significantly heavier. I mean,
there's things like chromoly axles that aren't in the other ones. So there's a lot of bits and pieces on the competition package that you wouldn't at first stop and think, huh, those weigh more, but it all adds up slowly.
Which tells me in the future that if Skidoo takes, when Skidoo takes, because I'm sure they will, when they take that turbo engine and put that into
like an XRS,
a regular XRS without the competition package, I think we're going to be looking at a really light turbo.
And the Polaris, it carries 2 gallons more fuel.
7.5 liters, which equals roughly 12 pounds. If we call a liter of gas 1.63 pounds, which I think is roughly 0.74 kilograms, which I think everybody can agree that that's pretty close.
That was really good, by the way.
Thanks, I remembered all that information.
Because that extra fuel is compensating comparatively to
12 liters is a lot.
Yeah,
like you're talking
parts on the competition package, it's equaling them out. So
the competition package only has a 36-liter tank. Polaris has 1/3 more fuel than the Skidoo. Now, something that I would like to, and we've argued about this, or not argued, but we've discussed this, something I would like to know is how far do both of these snowmobiles, if you rode them at exactly the same throttle, roughly the same RPM, same speed down the lakes, if we just kept side by side and we did nothing but run lakes all the way from here to, Dorset and back, and stayed right beside each other the entire time, how much better fuel economy does either of the turbos get? Because if the Skidoo gets dramatically more with the E-Tech, which always was in the past, it was better on fuel and oil, that 12 extra liters may not make a big difference, but 12 liters is a lot. I mean, if it's using 12 liters more fuel, then
That's pretty dramatic. You're talking about a weight difference of approximately 10 pounds that is explained by certain bits and pieces that make one heavier versus the other. At the end of the day, I think what needs to be, and of course, the Polaris has electric start.
Yes.
The Skidoo has shock.
Skidoo has shock.
I think basically what it boils down to is I suspect that the Skidoo turbo setup plus the methanol injection system is actually heavier than Polaris's turbo.
I think I would agree.
Yeah,
that
it
must
kind
be
of
the case.
has to be.
That methanol tank weighs quite a bit. I mean, even if it's only 4 liters or 5 liters, you're still talking like 6 to 7 pounds.
Yep, right there.
6 to 8 pounds.
Just in the fluid.
Just in the fluid alone. That's a lot.
All right, what's up next?
Next is something that just jumped out at me right away. So 2023 Skidoo Renegade XRS in the G5 platform, 850, pre-studded Ice Ripper 125. It's a 137. It had the smart shocks on it, has the 10.25 display, and it's electric start. Weighed in at 651 pounds. Cool, 651, all right. This year, not a comparable sled per se, different sled, but I was shocked at the weight. So just hear me out. Backcountry XRS. So you're talking, it's 850, it's
G5.
got a G5, it's got an Ice Cobra 1.6. That's a heavier track. I mean, you're talking,
By a lot.
yeah, quite a bit heavier. It's 146, so there's extra rubber as well, not just extra lug, there's extra length. Does not have smart shocks, does have the 10.25 display, but it's got shot instead of electric start. So we're down on shot, which gives us less weight on this backcountry. We're up on track, lug, and length, which should add more weight. I thought maybe that would even things out. The Renegade XRS 137, so it's shorter, has smart shocks. Okay, what do smart shocks weigh? We're gonna find out. And it does have electric start. 651 compared to 577.5 pounds. That is 75 pounds difference.
So we need to clarify, it's the Renegade XRS that is 75 pounds heavier than the backcountry XRS.
Bigger, longer sled. Like
Yeah.
that, so smart
Same
shocks,
motor, same chassis.
same motor, same chassis. But that tells me that smart shocks must weigh quite a bit, and that would
And
make
electric
sense.
start.
And
Smart shocks and electric start are
You
gonna
got to
weigh
have
a
a
lot.
battery,
Yep.
and all the other electric start components. But smart shocks in and of itself, I think, is a heavy add-on. So
It makes sense. You've got a control unit, you've got sensors, but then when you look at those shocks, there is a large
It is
extra
big.
piece on the side of the shock, and it's all the way around the
it's
sled.
all of it. I mean, all that wiring too. You got to
Yep.
run wiring
Yep.
through the whole sled. If you take out the MXZ Neo Plus, which we had last year,
Yep.
great snowmobile for kids. If you take that out and you take our RMK 9R Chaos out from last year, and that was a 146.
So these are very not comparable sleds.
Not
and
comparable
we know
sleds,
that.
but-
This is just for
Yeah.
interest. Okay?
And really
Just
for us, those aren't trail sleds that you and I are gonna go jump on. We're not gonna jump on a 9R Chaos and go out and ride the trails, and we're not gonna jump on a Neo Plus, you and I, and go out for a day's ride with the boys. It's just not the first pick, not the right ones. Take the next lightest sled. It's the Catalyst ZR600. And it weighs in at 561 pounds, and it pretty much, well, it kind of does mop the floor with everybody else. Now,
Yeah.
I thought it was originally going to be significantly lighter than this. I thought that Catalyst was going to weigh in somewhere around like the 530, 540 range, but it didn't. It's 561, and it does have the ATAC suspension on it.
That's right.
So that's telling me that I think Smart Shocks and I think ATAC do weigh
Yeah. And
a
if you
decent
could
amount.
get the more base model Catalyst 600 that has the standard shocks, I would be interested because I'll bet that weighs, well, I mean, you're claiming around 20 pounds. So let's say you take 20 pounds off that, that's 540.
That's gonna be 540.
That's an extremely light trail snowmobile that's in trail riding form full of fuel. That's
And maybe I'm wrong about that, but when you do look at the Catalyst standard, like threaded preload spring, shocks, they're really small
Yeah.
and they look like they're super light. And when you look at an ATAC shock, it looks a lot
big.
heavier.
It has a lot of stuff
bigger.
on it.
Yeah, it's beefier. So these are some interesting things. One of the other comparisons that we sort of found interesting, we don't have our 24 Yamaha, at this filming, we will have it tomorrow.
it'll be a Sidewinder.
Yeah, but the Sidewinder, I think the industry as a whole, other people besides
We're really
Yamaha,
guilty of this.
yeah, they were pretty hard on Yamaha for weight.
Yeah, we were too.
We were too.
We've always
and the reality is, after we put this thing on the scales, which a lot of people were hesitant, for us to actually weigh real world sled weights, I think it came to Yamaha's benefit, in
I do
all
too.
honesty, because 667 pounds for a 1,000cc turbo sled with what, arguably 200 horsepower, like the fastest snowmobile on snow, that is not that heavy. We were
Especially
shocked.
when you
I thought it was going to be 700 plus.
I did too. I thought it'd be over 700, but then when you put it up against Renegade XRS Turbo R, so a 3-cylinder, 4-stroke turbo, very similar in componentry to that sled from Skidoo, it is what, 32 pounds lighter. It's only 32 pounds lighter. And here's something you got to keep in mind. This is important. That Yamaha motor was not specifically designed to fit in a snowmobile. It fits in the snowmobile, and Arctic Cat made it, or Yamaha made it work. They worked together to make it work, but the Skidoo motor was built for a snowmobile.
Yeah.
So when you're looking at it from that perspective, that it's a compromise in the Yamaha, but not in the Skidoo, that is very impressive numbers.
Something interesting about the Sidewinder is that motor was relatively unchanged for a long period of time as well. Skidoo has really put a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of money, I'm certain, at Rotax, fitting that 900R and making that work.
Make you fit in the G5.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
I think if Yamaha had have taken the time to go on a massive weight savings trip, they probably could have dropped a lot of pounds too, but they didn't need to because they got the most horsepower.
And when you do horsepower to weight number, the Sidewinder, I mean, it probably wins.
I would think it probably
It'd be
does
really
as well.
close in terms of power to weight. And we've talked a lot about power to weight and how important that is. So when you take that into consideration, there's a lot more to what makes a good snowmobile than power to weight. But when we almost owe Yamaha a little bit of an apology here, because we have oftentimes said that Yamahas are super heavy. Comparatively, they're
not
heavy,
that bad.
but they're not that heavy.
Compared to other 4-strokes, they're not
So
really
let's
heavy.
do the comparison just for interest's sake.
Sure.
For the S4 to the Sidewinder.
The S4 Indy XC, which is a 129, but the previous year we had a ProStar Indy XC and a 137, correct? So it had electric start and it had a 135 Cobra. Our Sidewinder was an LTX LE EPS, so it has power steering. Power steering weighs a lot. That is not a light feature. It has a Ripsaw 2 125, so yeah, a very small amount of difference in track there. It was 137 as well, had QS3s on it, as opposed to the
S4
XC,
has got the Polaris version.
the Polaris version of QS3. And yeah, they both have electric start, but power steering, so that's a big deal. The Polaris weighed in at 681 pounds ready to ride, 681.5, and the Yamaha was 667. So
17 pounds lighter. The Yamaha was lighter than Polaris's S4.
with power steering,
With power steering.
with arguably an extra 100 horsepower.
10? Polaris is around 90.
Is it?
It's not 100.
So 100 extra, let's just call it
So
100
can you
horsepower.
put 2 S4 motors in this sled? Will that work?
I think weight would be a little up.
A little bit. Put one on the back.
So that does go towards Yamaha's benefit in a great way. If they pulled power steering out of that sled, guaranteed it goes down by minimum 20 pounds, probably more, probably way more than that. I mean, power steering is significant.
Yeah.
So you're talking quite a benefit with a Yamaha snowmobile. I don't know. I mean, is there anything else in here that you're really shocked at? I think the Switchback Assault Boost is an interesting one.
Is an interesting one for sure.
Yeah.
And it really doesn't make a ton of sense. And this is one of the ones that really kind of made me scratch my head, because an Indy VR1 boost is a 137 Cobra R-rated track. So whatever that R means, whether it's 2-ply, I'm sure it's just a tougher track, so it would be heavier.
Yep.
It's 602 pounds. The Switchback Assault Turbo, both electric start, right?
Yep.
The Turbo has got a 135 Cobra. It's a 146. They have the same shocks, the same windshield, the same display.
Same electric start.
Same electric start. And the Switchback Assault is only 2 pounds heavier.
2 pounds heavier.
I'm having trouble believing that a 137 to 146 extra skid frame, extra track length, extra tunnel only accounts for 2 pounds.
I think the Polaris engineers really know how to pull weight out of those skids.
They must.
They gotta.
It's a different skid,
that
too.
That R-rated track must be
Heavy.
It must be a significant weight gain. So those two things right there have got to be what makes the difference. I mean, everything else is the same. So
literally the same.
How much does it cost to get 9 inches more track and rail? I guess, well, and tunnel too, right? Because it's a bit longer tunnel. So I guess the track makes up for the difference in that going R-rated. So if you wanted to do an interesting comparo, again, Switchback Assault Boost versus Backcountry XRS G5. Not a boosted sled, but the difference there is roughly 30. It's just shy. It's like 27 pounds. So I'm going to be interested next year because I gotta think that the Renegade Backcountry XRS is going to be able to have the turbo in it, the 850 turbo. It's got to.
I think you're going to see a lot of turbos from Skidoo next year.
I think so too, and that will be a telltale. We'll be able to see at that point, okay, what does this sled weigh in comparison to the Switchback from Polaris? Because that's not going to be a competition package. It's not going to have all that extra stuff that adds extra weight for a competition package so it can be raced.
Yep.
That'll be a real true comparison, and we'll see exactly if that methanol tank is the thing that pulls down on it. I don't know. Maybe Skidoo will come up with something and change the methanol system. Maybe they won't put that on
a smaller methanol tank.
Well, they could do that too.
Last one I think we should talk about, because it's a really good comparison. It's pretty fair, is the 600s.
600, there is a good comparison here.
Yeah, we've got, your Catalyst 600.
Yep.
Now it does have, as you said, ATAC, so it's got the electric shocks, which the other two don't.
Yep.
But we've got the XCR 650 and we've got an MXZ XRS 600R. They are, those are direct competitors.
Yes, absolutely.
So,
and roughly, so when you talk ice ripper track, in the past, a lot of people have said, oh, ice rippers, they got to be 10, 12 pounds heavier. And they're not, they're 1 pound heavier. So,
which is crazy.
Yeah, it's because I'm sure they pull it out in other areas, but those studs only weigh a pound when it comes to track. So ice ripper to, regular 1.25 inch track is only 1 pound difference. So let's not really call that too much. But yeah, we're 600 to 650 to 600. 1.25 ice ripper on the Skidoo. We have the XCR is a 135 Cobra. Arctic Cat
it's not an ice track. It's not an ice ripper.
No, it's not an ice ripper. I think it's a 125. So that's pretty much across the board. Lengths are all the same. We're in the the 128, 129 range. Yep. Suspension, obviously, as we talked about on the Arctic Cat, is the electronic suspension. The Indy has the Walker Evans velocities, and the MXZ XRS does not have the smart shocks. It's just a regular clicker on that one, I believe.
Well, but it's XRS, so it's got the piggybacks.
Yeah, it's got the piggybacks. But
which would be comparable to a QS3.
Yep, and it doesn't have the big display on the Skidoo either. We opted for the 7.2, so it doesn't have the 10.25. But I do believe the XCR has the 7S, so that is a heavier display. I installed one last week on a sled that didn't have it. It's not all that much heavier, but it is a little bit heavier. The heaviest actually is the Indy at 588.5 pounds. 588 pounds, it's compared to the XRS 600R at 574 pounds, 14 pounds heavier between the XRS to the Indy XCR. And then when you want to go down to the lightweight one, the Arctic Cat is 561 pounds, which shaves an extra 13.5 pounds off of
the XRS,
the Skidoo XRS,
and makes it, compared to the Polaris,
23.5 pounds lighter
than the Polaris.
And it has the electronic shocks.
And that's right, yes, that's important. Now, we do need to say, and we've said this before, between the Skidoo and the Polaris carries 2 gallons more fuel, which is approximately 10 to 12 pounds.
12 pounds.
12 pounds.
12 pounds.
So if you actually compared same fuel levels, the Polaris would be very similar to the Skidoo in terms of weight.
Kind of the highs and the lows. There's some light stuff in there. The MXZ Neo Plus is by far the lightest snowmobile.
A Neo is 495.
Yep.
And then the next lightest, as you mentioned earlier, is the
9R RMK Chaos
at 514, 20 pounds heavier. Before we end, what's the heaviest sled here?
The heaviest sled, I think, might be the ProStar S4 Titan Adventure. Weighs in at 837 pounds, electric start, QS3s, 155, 1.5 Cobra, S4 Titan Adventure. That is a huge snowmobile.
That's 47 pounds more than an Expedition 900 Turbo R. It's that engine that weighs 40 pounds.
Yeah, the S4 motor, I think, is a heavy motor. That's pretty much the information. I think it's interesting. These weights are important.
The end of the day, this is my disclaimer, we can only weigh what we have. So if you don't see it on this list, it's not because we don't care. It's not because we didn't want to know. It's not because we were like, hey, don't bother with that one. We just don't have it.
What a manufacturer puts as a dry weight, because I'm going to weigh it ready to ride, and I think that's the information that you guys really want.
And you can get it here
bringing
from us.
And we're going to continue to do it. So
you're welcome.
Check them back.